We're going to wait a few minutes because there'll be more to come. So meanwhile, it'd be good if everybody could mute themselves in the normal, I think you probably will have. But we'll start in about 4 minutes time. There's still more people coming in, so we'll start at 5 past. So thanks for being patient, but particularly thank you for being punctual. Okay, I think we'll start now. So welcome once again to this book launch, Making Our Own History, a user's guide to historical materialism by Jonathan White. My name is Mary Davis. I'm Secretary of Marx Memorial Library. And just to say that if you are not a member of the library already, please join. Marx Memorial Library is hosting this because this is actually something that is very much part of what we do at the library. Book launches on Marxism, courses and lectures galore. And if you look in the chat, you will see, I hope by now, yes, a list of our current courses and our future programme. Marx Memorial Library was established in 1933, for those of you who don't know this, to save, well, it's the anniversary of Marx's, the 50th anniversary of Marx's birth or death, and death, sorry, and also that it was the 1933 was when the fascists came to power in Germany, the burning of books, and our library was founded then. It became the repository of Marxist books that were banned elsewhere. The history of the library, by the way, you can find all of this information on our website, and it's a remarkable place. If you haven't joined, you must do so. But it is our full title is Marx Memorial Library and Workers' School, and the Workers' School aspect of our work is absolutely intrinsic, integral, and very, very important. All three of us here tonight are on the education committee of MML, so we participate and try to ensure that the Workers' School side of the library is very effective. Hopefully you will all participate at some point in some of the courses, but it's very, very relevant tonight to when I'm introducing Jonathan's book, Making Our Own History, because as he says in the introduction to the book, that it was partly inspired by a course that he was teaching, actually, or a series of lectures that he gave at the library on historical materialism. And it was suggested that maybe this should be a book. And it's something I know that he's wanted to write anyway. But the book also has got a practical application, because now Jonathan is teaching a series of classes based on the book. These are, I'm afraid you can't join at the moment. They're on at the moment. They started on the 23rd of January, Jonathan, is that right? Oh no, he can't answer, he's muted. You don't need to mute yourselves. So the book its subtitle is A User's Guide to Historical Materialism. So it is being used to guide people in a practical fashion throughout these courses. The book is published jointly by Praxis Press and Marx Memorial Library, so it is one of our publications. The format for tonight will be that, having introduced Jonathan, will kick off and we'll talk about his book. And then I'm going to be using my position as chair also will say something about the book. And then that will be followed by John Foster, who will also contribute to a discussion about the book. And then it's over to you for questions, discussion, and so on. So please put your questions or comments or whatever you want to say in the chat, but particularly questions. I don't think we've probably got much space for comments. I don't think it's going to be possible, but questions certainly. And then, of course, there'll be a reply to that by the three of us, or if we can reply to the questions, I hope we can. Anyway, I hope that it will be engaging and interesting, and it's a vitally important subject, as Jonathan will certainly be able to enthuse you with. It's the foundation of everything that we're about as Marxists, and something that we absolutely need to understand. Historical materialism is the essence of how we understand both the present and the past, and hopefully the future as well. So I'm going to introduce Jonathan now. And Jonathan is very modest, so he doesn't really want me to say very much about himself, other than the fact that he is a trustee of Marx Memorial Library. He's a trade union official, but he's a very, very, very good educator. And as you will see if you read his book, he writes beautifully as well. And it's without further ado that I'm really delighted to ask Jonathan to introduce this really important book, and he can say why he's written it and how it can guide us to use historical materialism in our work. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for that, Mary. Is everything that can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, and thanks to everyone for coming out on a Friday night to do this. I'm coming out, you know what I mean, you know. switching on. It's greatly appreciated. So yeah, it is a great honour to have Mary and John here tonight, because they were fantastic supports during trying to write this book, and they really, as well as having to read the whole thing, they also were just very supportive and very helpful throughout the process, and it wouldn't have got done without them. So I'm going to say thank you to them now for everything they've done to help it get published. It is also a great honor to publish it with Praxis and the Marx Memorial Library. And Mary's absolutely right. It's not just because of the fantastic work that it does and its historical associations, but also because the book was born out of teaching and lecturing on historical materialism at the library. I think that's right. The idea did come from someone attending a lecture, and I thought that it was something I really wanted to do anyway. So it was a great prompt to do it. I wanted to talk a bit about what I was trying to do with the book, which is no guide obviously to how it will be read, but it's worth explaining a bit why the book looks the way it does. A lot of books could have been written about historical materialism, but this one looks the way it does for a few reasons I just wanted to spell out, I suppose. The first was, and Mary alluded to this at the beginning, I wanted to produce a teaching text, a short, accessible book that would help people who are interested in learning a bit more about Marxism to fill out their understanding of the richness of this worldview, and the basics of which were formulated by Marx and Engels. Our Marx Memorial Library lectures and classes have been their own testament to the upsurge in interest in Marxism, as people question the fundamentals of our contemporary political, economic and social order. We've seen massive turnouts in recent years, both in the reading room and in our online sessions for classes on capital, for reading groups on capital, on the Marxist theory of crisis, the Marxist theory of the state, and so on. Now, I was originally, back a long time ago, I was a historian, and I've sort of grown up with that perspective on Marxism, and I became interested in developing that aspect of what we deliver at the Workers' School. And when I looked around for a teaching book to recommend to people interested in learning more about Marxism and the interpretation of history, and something for the general reader, there really wasn't much there, and hadn't been much, I don't think, since Maurice Cornforth's fantastic trilogy on dialectical materialism, which included one volume on historical materialism. Those, they're still brilliant books, I think. They're triumphs of clarity of exposition and conciseness, so in a way that it's not an aspiration to compete with that, but one of the motivations to write this book was to see if I could produce something that took the spirit of those books really, and of being accessible, and brought it a little more up to date, because they are quite old now, and I wanted something see if I could produce something that was a bit more rooted in today's world and would be recognizable to people now. So that aspiration is also behind the attempt to pepper the text throughout with examples to illustrate the application of Marxist theory. And that was something I found students consistently ask for. And it's actually something that I think is quite difficult to do. And I don't know how well I succeeded, really. But I did want to make sure that that the book included a lot of examples. Now, obviously, those of how to apply Marxist theories, but obviously the examples reflect my own comfort zone. Still, I thought it was an important thing to do, an important dimension of a teaching book, really. Now, the book itself is divided into two halves. The first one, it sets out what I see as being the basic theoretical core, enduring theoretical core of historical materialism. And that's very briefly the centrality of production in human history, the identification of the contradiction between forces and relations of production in driving the development of human societies. the identification of a series of modes of production with distinctive class relationships within them, and the way that class struggles emerge, which are then reflected in the superstructure of societies and in their ideas, their culture and politics. And that this produces that history can be evidences a series of great epochs of social revolution that accompany that process. So I suppose the core message that of this section of the book really was to try to communicate the idea that these tools, if we apply them well, can give us a tremendously powerful dimension of class consciousness. That historical materialism gives us the tools that help us to analyze that core Marxist dictum that humans make their own history. That, you know, Marx repeats this in slightly different formulations throughout his work. That humans make their own history, but not in the conditions or circumstances of their own choosing. And that a key condition of, I think, of effective self-conscious action in the world, including of class-conscious revolutionary action, is a proper understanding of the forces that are at work and the structures and struggles that they generate, and which we inherit as we come to political consciousness. And I think that's probably what I'd love it if people went away from the book thinking about. And that active engagement with the totality of our history, that it's a condition of revolutionary consciousness, not just because it exposes the struggles of our predecessors, but because it exposes the forces that are at work, that brought us here, that work independently of our will, but which we can act upon and create, and which create the potential and the basis for the possibility of taking transformative action that will unleash the potentials of a potential future society, a higher, more sophisticated, a better mode of production and a better society. And I suppose that emphasis on the relationship between historical materialism and action is really why the second half of the book looks the way it does. That looks at the way in which historical materialism has been applied. And again, there are a number of different ways in which this could have been written. But the way I wanted to write it was to look at it, I suppose, in a kind of historical materialist way. So there's a chapter on the 18th, the way that Marx applies historical materialism, most recognizably in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. But I also wanted to look at the way in which revolutionaries who overthrew Tsarist Russia and worked to build socialism in the Soviet Union, and whose actions had such profound consequences in the development of world history, the way in which they used historical materialism and applied it. So chapter 7 of the book, for example, looks at the way in which Lenin and Lukács conceived of historical materialism as a critical dimension of their revolutionary thought, and the way in which the construction of the Soviet Union itself saw significant developments in historical materialism, and in two ways. In a way, as a theory that gripped the masses, for example, and as an institutionally embedded approach to world historical scholarship. So the chapter talks about the way in which Stalin's dialectical and historical materialism, which is often criticized as being a crude text, and in many ways is, but should be understood better as an educational tool for a mass of cadres as part of socialist construction, as part of developing a worldview on a mass basis. While the work of Soviet Marxist historians became embedded in and influenced the development of communist-aligned, embedded in universities and research institutes, and then influenced the development of communist-aligned historians in the West. Now, I made a conscious decision, I suppose, that I wanted the book to argue that the fate of historical materialism as a way of thinking about the world in itself is intimately connected to the ebb and flow of class struggles and the development or degradation of socialist relations of production, and not, as I think is too often seen to be the case, not determined by academic fashions or scholarly interventions. That we have to be historical materialists about historical materialism. I mean, there are obviously costs to the way in which I wrote that book, because of the need to keep it short, and because of that emphasis that I wanted on the way it interrelates with revolutionary politics more generally. I think some people whose contributions are very significant to historical materialism probably aren't as prominent as they could be. But that was a cost, I think, of writing, of trying to keep it short and concise at the same time as trying to do what I was trying to do. In the final chapter of the book, I wanted to come back to today and the here and now and recap a bit by identifying some of the things that I think change when we see the world in this way. What does it give us? And I suppose there are two things that I pick out in that chapter. One is an understanding of ourselves as bound up with history, as connected intimately to the past and the future, and that the past isn't really actually a foreign country at all. It's an active agent in the present. And this runs against, some of the common sense ways in which people think about history, and against most academic conventions about history. And it's sort of something I wish I'd written more about, in a way, the way in which the sense of separation from history is a spontaneous feature of capitalist societies, another manifestation of alienation, if you like. And the second thing was that I identify in that final chapter is the way in which historical materialism improves our understanding of what the task of the moment is, of our particular historical moment is. That historical struggles present us with specific challenges, and that historical materialism gives us the tools for identifying exactly what our historical task is at any one point in time. And the examples I use the example of Lenin, obviously, in a way, but there's a point in State and Revolution where he talks, I mean, it runs throughout Lenin's thought and throughout that book, but there is a point where in State and Revolution where he argues that that there is no point in spending too long thinking about what the exact forms of a socialist state will be, because the historical material doesn't exist to allow us to answer that question at the moment. The task of the moment is to expropriate the bourgeoisie. That is the task of the moment. And once that's been done, then the dynamic will throw up the potential answers to those questions. And in a way, that's a repetition of Marx's quote from the preface that mankind only sets itself questions it's got the materials to answer. But that's a key point, I think, about obviously that example of Lenin's is a very grand scale example about revolutionary strategy, but I think it holds as an approach to the way in which we lead our lives and conduct our struggles, whether we're trade union officials or engaged in campaigns in our communities over various things. There is a sense of the importance of being able to understand the precise character of the historical moment. And that's something else I think I wish, in retrospect, I'd probably written a bit more about, because you see it all the time in progressive movements. You see the costs of not having that approach in the burnout of activists, of enthusiastic activists, people who enter our movement and attempt to and struggle heroically, constantly, on a day in, day out, in a multitude of campaigns, but whose experience of setback, of time, of simply the amount of time it takes to effect change, or of frustration, can lead them to drop out of politics, or to demoralization, and to kind of a real emotional suffering in many ways. which makes the book sound a little bit like a self-help manual, and it's not supposed to be at all. But I do think there is a, you know, and that there is a sort of emotional development element to politics, which I think historical materialism helps with. And that's also why the Brecht poem is in there at the end as well. Anyway, I don't want to talk anymore. I want to stop now. But I hope that's helpful in at least sketching what I was trying to do. As I say, whatever people take away from it is a different issue. But that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, I suppose, to start some discussion in our movement about this vital dimension of our emancipatory politics.
No, thank you, Jonathan. Terrific. Well, you modestly say, well, did you succeed? You said that you wanted to write an accessible text, I think you should say. I don't think teaching text. I don't think it's quite that. And you correctly identified that since Morris Bornfield's stuff, there has been very little written about what we always say is a key aspect of Marxism. And in fact, it's the essence of Marxism, historical materialism. You'd have succeeded. This is a very accessible and a very good book. It raises for me many, many more questions. I'm going to pose something to you. You don't have to answer them, but I think these are questions that we will all need to ask ourselves, having read the book and understand what historical materialism is. And I think your exposition of the foundations is excellent. You've shown in practical ways how historical materialism has been used. You mentioned the 18th Brumaire. You also, as you say, talk about the Soviet historians, and the particular one I think that is most important is Kosminski and the tradition from feudalism to capitalism, who I think works brilliant. But you then go on also to look at the Communist Party history group, and the wonderful tradition of British Marxist historians, people like Christopher. We can go through all the names, but Christopher Hill is the obvious one that sticks out massively for me. But there's so many of them, and this does raise a question for me. You talk about having historical materialist understanding of historical materialism, and you also say that historical materialism is connected to the ebb and flow of class struggle. And it absolutely is, but it does then raise the question, where are our wonderful historical materialist historians today? Why why haven't we got the kind of grouping? I think it's a rhetorical question, I think, a bit, but if this book can help to inspire a new generation of historical materialist historians or people who are interested in history from a historical materialist perspective, it will have done a fantastic job of work. So you look at how it, well, the subtitle is How It Will Change Your Life, and you kind of raises questions for me. You raise the major question is how historical materialism enables us to understand the moment, the task of the moment. But this also raises questions about how we actually apply as historians. And some of the difficulties and dilemmas, and you examine this, but there's a question that I think is raised. You quote a very wonderful passage in the Grundrisse, which basically saying that the only way to understand the past is from the present, and the only way to understand past societies, and Marx says that, because we're in the higher stage of capitalist society, therefore we're better able to understand pre-existing class societies, feudalism particularly, and slavery. That raises a big question for me. We're not at the highest form of stage of development. He uses the example of animals, doesn't he? So if we interpret that correctly from that quote from Marx, i.e. that capitalism being at the stage of society we're in, which is the highest stage, and if you to put it crudely, that enables us to understand the past, then can we therefore say that it's only when we've got socialism that we can understand capitalism, because socialism is a higher form of society, if you see what I mean? But that's just a question that's always beset me, and I don't like to have a kind of a teleological view, actually, of the inevitability of the development of one form of class society to another. Historical materialism, the whole notion of historical materialism is, that we make our own history. We don't make it just as we please. The other thing is that can we? There's certain questions that, if we're looking about writing or applying historical materialism, how do we, as historians, overcome the charges of what people call bias? Why don't we say, and I know we can argue this, and I have done, and I'm sure both of you two will be able to say, well, aren't you biased by being a historical materialist? And of course, we can't just say no, because this is a science. We have to be very sure of our grounds, but normally historians don't reveal their bias, because the closer they are to the ruling ideology of the day, the less biased they're supposed to be. It's only when people, from our perspective, want to change society, we have to kind of reveal the fact that we are writing from a Marxist perspective. We shouldn't have to do that, but we would be called the biased ones. And I think the whole question of bias in history is something that we have to be such good historical materialists that we can, that charge cannot be brought against us. But of course it will be, because historical materialism, as you put it, really is important to change our lives. I wish you'd said a bit more about that, but that's the key thing. We cannot change society unless we understand it. The quote on Marx's grave, philosophers have tried to understand the world in various points to change it, but you do have to understand in order to change. The other issue that arises from the point of view of the historian's craft is how we approach specialisms. And everybody will be aware that within the academic world, well, first of all, labour history isn't really taught anymore, or neither is anything to do with Marxism, but your academic historians, in order to make their name, increasingly specialise over really what you might call rather sometimes trivial things. You give the example in the book, actually, of Jonathan, of how we would understand from a historical materialist perspective a country house. You give, I think that's one of the examples you give, which is, I think, it's quite a brilliant example. But if you think about an abstract, I think this is an example that Marx uses, how a historian might look at population. You can't look at population as such, but there are people who do look at population, historians, or would look at a particular aspect of population, or would look, for example, at something very specialised like the standard of living of English workers at the turn of the 18th century, 19th century. So we have to, and you can't, when you're looking at something specialist in that way, say, well, yes, well, we have to locate it within the force and relation. Of course, we do that, but we can't spell that out. So the question, I think, is a very challenging one for how Marxists can write history, and to imbue that history with a historical materialist understanding without having to use every word of your introduction in the book, which explains what historical materialism is. So the practical application to specific and specialised areas of historical materialism, I think, is a challenge for us. And hopefully that a book like this, which does spell it out in exactly what we understand by historical materialism, rather than just using it as a phrase, will then help, I hope, future generations of historians to actually pick up from where the Communist Party history group left it I've so it's the 40s, 50s probably, and that's about it. But a huge generation of wonderful Marxist historians, Rodney Hilton, E.P. Thompson, Eric Hobsbawm. I mean, I could go on. We haven't seen their like, I think, in our day, and that's what we need. And we particularly need women historians who can integrate the the analysis of the oppression of women, half the human race, into not writing women's history, but writing history that includes half the human race. And that includes, for example, not just examples, it includes paying attention to the two oppressed groups, Black people and women, integrating that with an analysis of the whole. This isn't writing Black history or women's history, this is writing proper history, which I think historical materialism can lead us to, a historical materialist understanding of the development of human society. And the mode of change of society, class struggle, has to include those particular groups which have been hidden from history. That's our job, and I think Jonathan's book makes a fantastic contribution to starting this process off. And I hope it won't be necessarily my generation, but forthcoming generations will be able to use this in order to start invigorating Marxist historical writings on all manner of things in an integrated and Marxist fashion. Anyway, that's what I've got to say for the moment. I know I've raised more questions than answers, but I want to introduce now John Foster, who is a well-known historian. He's the secretary of our education committee, Marx Memorial Library. He's written a huge amount, and I know that he very much appreciates Jonathan's book. And so over to John for you to make your contribution.
Thanks very much, Mary. It's difficult to follow both you and Jonathan, who made such an eloquent opening. I think it's a book that's a marker for the future, but also immensely relevant to the present. It's a book that the trade union and labour movement needs. There's a whole new generation coming into the movement at the moment as a result of the struggles we face. And I think they're looking for explanations to what has been happening in our society, not just the gross inequalities, not just the loss of what we had achieved, but also how it is organized and how to develop the strategy to overcome it. And that is what I think Jonathan's book starts to do. It is a user's guide. And it's in the tradition, as Mary said, of Marx Memorial Library. That's what Marx Memorial Library has always set out to do. It is a complement, I think. It's an addition to the book that was published last year. That's Eric Rahim's How Marx Developed His Marxist Worldview, which I think in its accessibility provides an introduction to Marxism that is, I think, at the moment, very, very important. But it is Jonathan's book, a practical application that, in a sense, follows up Lenin's definition of Marxism. It was a wonderful definition. Marxism is the summing up of the experience of the working class in its struggle for socialism. And that says some crucial things about what Marxism is. It's not something that's dead. It's not something that was written by Marx and Engels. It's not something written by a few theorists. It's something that stems from the collective struggle and experience of working people. It is continually being remade in the struggle for socialism. And it is therefore collective. And that, I think, is the key to Jonathan's book. That's why it's a user's guide. One example he gives, which is close to my heart because I've studied it, is the UCS work-in. I think that comes about the middle of the book, where he looks at how the shop stewards trying to defend a group of Scottish shipyards in 1971 went about it. And they went about it unlike most other workers at the time. It wasn't just a matter of responding, in a sense, to trade union guidelines when a workplace is threatened with closures, going to the trade union federation, the Confed or something like that. They had a strategy, and they had a strategy because they were shop stewards who were Marxists, who had been educated by those communist historian tutors that Mary talked about, from the Communist Party's historians group, from those who were working in Marx Memorial Library in those days. And the leading stewards were able to develop a strategy that tapped into an analysis of how to develop a wider alliance, an anti-monopoly alliance. That was the words that they used. How to exploit the divisions within capital, how to develop an understanding of the national question from a Marxist point of view in terms of mobilizing the Scottish people, not for separatism, but to develop the class understanding of what it was for a nation to take control of its own lives, an understanding also of the dynamics of the working class movement. Now, all of these things were there because they had studied under Marxist tutors, and therefore were taking them forward, making their own history, making it collectively, and that was subsequently incorporated into the understanding of the working class movement as it moved through the 1970s and 80s. So that, I think, is the tradition that Jonathan's book wonderfully exemplifies and reestablishes in the new crisis that we now face. I don't think I want to say too much more. I think he's quite right in having not concentrated, in a sense, on academic Marxism, the kind of Marxism that dominates the syllabuses in some universities that do permit the study of Marxism, where it's aligned to existing academic philosophies of Weberianism, of French structuralism, or English analytical philosophy, but is about Marxism as it has been developed by working people and stemming, of course, from Marx himself. So I think that's as much as you want to hear from me. I think it's a wonderful book. I think it's the beginning of perhaps, as Mary said, a new flourishing of Marxist history, history written in looking at history as a whole, in its interconnections, not partitioned, but looking for its motive force, what changes it, and that is the power of working people to make their own history.
Great. Thank you, John. Now, there's not a huge amount of, well, yes, there are. There's more coming questions, but there's just two that I'm going to answer because somebody said, are our courses free? And the answer is no, they're not, but they're not very expensive because we do have to, the library has to make money in order to exist. So usually the courses cost, I can't remember how much. Oh yeah, about £20. I can't remember the online courses. John can answer the question probably better than me, but they're not free, but they're very cheap. They're far too cheap, actually, considering everything. And there was another question about when is the book out? Well, it is out. Look, that's what it looks like. Very nice cover, designed by John's brother, I think, Jonathan's brother. It's don't buy it on Amazon, for goodness sake. You'll get the link is there. Don't get it properly so we can get the money and not them. Or at least the library can get some. Okay, so some points. One Collier raises the question of saying that one of the reasons why historical materialism isn't that popular at the moment is because of this let me get it right. Because the problematic idea of paradigm and paradigm shifts has become so popular, and this, he says, it's probably at the expense of historical materialism, as paradigm is basically an idealist concept. So that's one comment what was for you to comment on, I think, about paradigm shifts. And there's, yes, Ludi Simpson says that says you insist that human species has a need to produce, an inner compulsion is to produce. Is that more than a description that humans can no longer live without some of them producing? Does the theory require you to say it is more, that is a natural, inherent characteristic? If you get that. Okay, so do you want to start with those two? I think I'll start. You, Jonathan, you can. I think they're directed at you, but anybody can come in, John, if you want to.
Anybody can come in, please. It's Ludi's question. Is it more than? Yes, I think it is more than that. I think it's an inherent characteristic is a sort of. Marx would see the compulsion to produce as being a kind of the thing that defines the humanity as a species, but that compulsion itself is always changing and is historical in its in what it means, and in the productive capacity that humans have is constantly changing and evolving. So it's not an inherent characteristic in the sense of a genetic predisposition or genetic code. But it's the thing that defines humans as a species. There's a wonderful book, I think it's really good, that I don't know if it's even in print anymore, but you can buy it secondhand, by Charles Wolfson, that that deals with this, with the role of production in the earliest development of the human species, and that takes Engels' comments about the importance of labor, of production as the secret of human development from the earliest primates onwards, and looks and reviews the research from the latest research on hominid development. And it's a fantastic book. It's short, again, has that great virtue, very readable, and I really think it's, people should try and find that book and revisit it, because I think it really does it addresses this question of the species being and the historical nature, the historical importance of the compulsion to labor. The other question was about, what was the other one?
Paradigm shifts. Paradigm shifts.
Yeah, I agree. I think the notion of a paradigm shift is a totally idealist notion. It's, in the sense that, if it means anything, it means a kind of, it's something that's produced by people studying a body of ideas and not necessarily looking at the way in which that body of ideas reflects and expresses material interests. So it tends to, the concept of the paradigm shift tends to, overplay massive change and iron out complexities within the development of ideas, and it's not. I don't think it's a very helpful notion. It does help people to describe sort of what is, what is the novelties of a theoretical, of a change in and development in dominant theories, but I don't think it's a particularly helpful notion. Yeah.
Do you want to say something about paradigm shifts, John?
Well, I think Jonathan said it. I think it's just a re-warming up of Hegel, isn't it? Which it was thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, ideas knocking against each other and having a slow gradation of transformation, identity of opposites. And Marx, of course, took this and turned it on its head, or put it the right way up, to say what he actually did. by saying you have to understand ideas in terms of their material roots, in terms of how societies are organized around production, how classes exploit particular ways in which they do and justify it, and how people challenge that. And then, if you look at that concretely as a whole, as history moves forward, you can understand the paradigm shifts, but it's not paradigm shifts that make history, it's people who make history. So I think paradigm shifts, yes, it shows the grip within academic understanding of society of idealism, but it stops us understanding the real forces, and that, of course, is that of class. I just want to make one other point, Mary, a very small one, and that is to say the cost of classes is £20 for unemployed or non-waged, and 35 for those who've got an income.
Right.
Is that useful?
Very, very useful.
That's a very materialist point.
We make our own history. Okay, so we make our own classes and we charge them. Somebody asked when the next Theory and Struggle is out. That is in April. Marge Mayo can confirm that. Anyway, 2 more questions. Jen Isaacson asks what the relationship of historical materialism is to social constructionism. That's one question. And another question from Peter Kelly. How do we know, or how do you know, when we're at a revolutionary moment? What a question. Right. Jonathan, go on, you can tackle both of them.
Answer either of those questions. Jen's question, I don't know that I know exactly what social constructionism is enough to be able to make an informed comment about that. And I think I would need to go and remember a lot of things that I've actively forgotten from when I was at university, and try and think about what that is to give you an answer, a proper answer. I'm sorry, that's a really hopeless answer, but you've answered it yourself. That's great. Historical materialism is the real social constructionism. Yeah, that's great. So thank you for that, Jen. That's very helpful. And in terms the when do you know? How do you know you're in a revolutionary situation? I think we have to define what we mean by that in the sense that Marx's concept of epochs of social revolution. Clearly, we are in an epoch of social revolution, but we are not in a country where we are imminently in a position of a political revolution. Each layer of Marx's use of those terms needs its own specific, needs to be carefully defined, and has its own defining characteristics of political revolution of the sort that Lenin was able to, and the Bolsheviks were able to exploit in 1917. It has its own specific features. When a working people are no longer willing to be ruled in the old way, and the ruling class is unable to rule in the same way. However, then between those two meanings of Marxist senses of revolution, between the epochal process of social revolution and those political revolutions, there are clearly, the potential for revolutionary, if the revolutionary tendencies that Marx and Engels and Lenin identified at work within capitalism, and that Lenin theorized in terms of monopoly capitalism and imperialism, and the expansion of the world market and the development of mass working classes, and then the potential for revolutionary outbreaks and the formation of socialist states. If all of that is still true, which I think it is, then then we're constantly We are constantly in potentially revolutionary situations. It's just, so I think it's quite important that we understand which level of historical materialism we're looking at, I suppose.
I'm going to have a little go at that as well,
Yeah,
John.
please do.
I think the key question is class consciousness and the level of class consciousness, which is determined by the strength, not just of the labour movement, but also of those elements within the labour movement, particularly Marxists, who basically do understand historical materialism and understand. Lenin says, well, people workers can understand what exploitation is in practice without understanding capitalism. They can understand all sorts of aspects of their own exploitation and possible oppression without linking it to the system that is actually enslaving them. And so the question of consciousness, how to understand that actually it's capitalism itself which is holding back the development of that is incapable of resolving class struggles because of the intrinsic contradiction between capital and labour, that only the overthrow of capitalism can lead to workers' emancipation. So, but that does require a level of consciousness, which isn't just born out of just going on strike or whatever. So I think that we would know that we're in a revolutionary moment, not just when the ruling class can't carry on in the old way, but that the working class won't let it. And they only won't let it when they're conscious enough to know, not necessarily every single individual, but that moment, if there's got to be a break within that moment. John, over to you.
I think you've probably said everything that can be said on that. It's when the ruling class can't rule in the old way, when it's smitten with basic contradictions, when there are major splits within it. If we think, and we just look at situations where revolutions have occurred, they are rather special occasions. It is when there are massive challenges, material challenges, and when there is a challenge by the working class, when the working class is not willing to be ruled in the old way, and where there is the development of an understanding of another way that begins to grip people's minds. And I think you're quite right, and Jonathan, I think, is quite right. It's when you have an understanding of the power of the working class and a perspective as to how society can and needs to be changed. In some ways, you could say this country at the moment is moving in that direction. I get the impression that our ruling class is split, dispirited, is struggling with material forces that it can't altogether control. And working people have seen in the last few years a transformation of the Labour Party that scared our ruling class more than anything I've seen, I think, in my lifetime, in terms of the response they made to a socialist in the leadership of the Labour Party and the trouble they've taken to try and destroy that. So there are factors there, but they do need to be developed, and they haven't developed yet. And that's why we need Marxism in a way that I think we haven't had it for a long time. And Jonathan's book helps us along that road.
Okay, there's another question, a tricky one here, about social classes in a socialist society. So the example is Cuba. What is a Cuban factory worker's relationship to the means of production? John, do you want to start with that?
Oh, you throw difficult questions at me.
Yeah.
In a sense, Cuba would say that the new ruling class that was formed as a result of that great revolution, and it should be remembered, it wasn't just a matter of people fighting up in the hills. the Cuban Revolution was brought about, especially in Cuba, because you had an unrivaled, I think, nowhere else in Latin America, Central America, Caribbean, did you have a proletarianized population. It had been a population that had been developed to grow sugar on plantations. They weren't peasants, they didn't have land, they were originally, many of them, slaves, or they were workers in services in the towns. And you had in Cuba the biggest proportionate communist party. It wasn't called a communist party, called a socialist party, but it was Marxist-Leninist, it was a communist party anywhere in Latin America. And in beginning an armed struggle, Castro and those around him fully understood those dynamics and maintained very close relations with the forces in the towns and cities. And so it was a revolution that was based on class forces and created a new revolutionary situation in which the committees of the revolution were established and a mass popular new order was established. And anybody can go to Cuba at the times of the great celebrations and they'll see that for themselves. So the factory workers in Cuba are part of that. They help to administer it. And although maybe it has become less so, this is one of the problems, I think, of socialism. Once the revolutionary generation is gone, how do you keep that revolutionary mobilization and confidence going? I think it's been a problem everywhere where you had the achievement of a revolution, of a mass popular revolution. But nonetheless, through struggle, through sacrifice, that country of Cuba has maintained that revolutionary identity. And I think you can say that the factory workers are part of the new social order, the new class that rules that society in the interests of all people. Anyway, that's me rambling on. I'm afraid a long history lesson, far too long.
I get the impression that this is, thanks for the analysis of Cuba, but I get the impression that the question is much more to do with what happens when we have a socialist society where the means of production are not in private hands. How do we define a worker's role in that situation in relation to a means of production which is socially owned? Jonathan.
I think that John's kind of answered that question, really. I mean, they are, you know, they are part of a they're part of an inherited division of labor within that society. They're part of, politically, they are part of the ruling class. So how do we define them? Well, we would define them, you know, as John said, politically they are part of the ruling class. They're still organized in production that is in social labor that is marked with the organization of labor and the division of labor under capitalism, and the extent to which that productive basis of society can be developed depends on the balance of their political power, on the balance of global class forces, on all of the things that are happening around them. But yes, I think I want to think about that a bit more, but I think, yes, I think that's right.
Now, I'm not sure that there are any other questions. So I think you've stunned everybody into understanding. That's the thing. So there are always more questions than answers. Anyway, so can I did a very bad introduction to Marx Memorial Library, but I'm going to please join if you haven't already, and please look at the website, which gives you a much better introduction to the library and all its fantastic works of Marx, Engels and Lenin that fill shelf after shelf after shelf. So when it's open, you can come and visit, but if not, look at the catalogue online. And thank you, Jen, who's definitely going to buy the book and who's going to join MML tonight. Yes, good old Jen. I'd like to see more messages like that. Anyway, so we won't prolong things, but we're going to have a little roundup just to end it off, and we're going to go in reverse order. So, sort of concluding remarks and ending with the author himself. John, you start.
Difficult to sum up. I did see an additional question on the chat was about are there good Soviet historians or writers relevant to history that could be recommended? I think that's really something for Jonathan, but I would flag up two people writing in the field of psychology, really, but they're writing about psychology as history, as a process of social understanding how social change occurs, the interaction between material forces and ideas. And that's Vygotsky and Voloshinov. And two historians that I think to some extent put those into operation is Porshnev and Kistozonov in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. So just to say that there are, I think, Soviet historians and writers who are still live in terms of their relevance to understanding social change. But in terms of just summing up Jonathan's book, I think it is just what's needed for the working class movement where we are at the moment. It is about making history. It's about that process of collective development of Marxism, how it has been done in the past and how it will be done in the future if the trade union and labor movement understands the need for Marxism, understands the need to encompass and bring to the fore the lessons of working people in the past in making their own history and apply them now, understands about class power and state power and about social transformation. Then we can make our history again and do some of the things about socialism that I think we talked about in the course of this, this seminar. So congratulations to Jonathan. His book can be bought for £10, I understand, via Marx Memorial Library. So get it from Marx Memorial Library rather than Amazon. It's much cheaper.
Yeah. Okay, I'm such a bad chair that what I forgot to tell you in saying something about MML is that you can actually tour the library even during lockdown. There is a virtual tour. I'm not quite sure how you get onto it, but I think somebody in the chat will tell you how to do that. So, I am useless at this actually. My 2 pence, apart from saying that Jonathan's book is excellent and all the things that I said before. A practical, for me anyway, a personal anecdote of why I know that historical materialism is the only answer to understanding history, and why everybody anyway should study history, because you cannot understand, you can't understand the present without understanding the past. So, but it was studying World War One, the classic interpretation, or the classic let's say empiricist sort of way of looking. British historians looked at what World War One is to say you had to understand there was 3 things. There was the alliance system and all that interchanging. There was the build-up of armaments, and then there was I can't remember what the third thing was, but anyway, but in essence, each of the 3, oh yes, the Balkans, sorry, for Balkans, and you had to really then go into great detail about all the 2 Balkan wars and all the rest of it. So, and within each of those 3 categories, there were about, I think you'd had to learn about sort of 25 facts about each of them. So, and the arms race was, of course, another thing. But of course, it didn't actually lead you to understand anything at all, other than the fact that, really, Sarajevo was the starting point. That's why they all went a bit silly after Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. That was just no understanding. The only way of understanding it was a historical materialist way, which is what actually Lenin's book on imperialism actually outlined. And that is, I think, a very good example of historical materialism, actually. Looking at the development of capitalism, looking at how, at its monopoly phase, that the clash between what monopoly capital is, what the export of capital, and of course the carving up of the world amongst the great powers, which by 1914 had reached its limit, and the only way it could change was by redividing it, and that meant war. And that was the most basic, I think it was the age of 18, the most basic for me introduction to the power of Marxism and the power of historical materialist analysis. And that looked at the forces of relations production, it looked at all the things that were in Jonathan's book. And it's a very, very simple thing, but if you can think of current situations or stuff that you learned at school, like, for example, what was the Industrial Revolution? What did it actually mean? Oh, I know, at school, it was to do with Clay's flying shuttle, Hargreaves spinning jenny, Arkwright's water flame, blah, 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 and James Watt. That's what the Industrial Revolution was. Well, of course it wasn't. But then you read Morris Dobb, which is a historical analysis of the development of capitalism, and just taking you through how feudalism led to two phases of capitalism, etc., etc. So historical materialism enables us to understand the past, and if it can enable us to understand the past from the vantage point of the present, and it's quite right to say that actually, in a way, if we say the present is really because we now have got the benefit of Marxism and historical materialism to enable us to understand the past, then that's what's so important about it. And that's what's so important about Jonathan's book, to enable, I'm sorry to repeat it, but if this can have an impact in helping the future of Marxist historians to write the kind of histories that people like Christopher Hill and Hobsbawm and many of the others that I've mentioned, and in particular to encourage women historians and to reveal that which has been hidden from history, to put it into a proper historical materialist context, to understand current social reality and how that developed, then Jonathan's book's done a fantastic service. It is a very good book. Don't buy it from Amazon. John's quite right. Buy it from the library. And I think there's a link there to where you can get it from. So, Jonathan White, you are the author of this book that we've all been talking about. So you have got the last word. Over to you.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks to you and John for your kind words about the book and for taking the time out to talk about it as well. It's great. I don't know what to say really at the end of it, except one very practical thing I'll say is that the best way to get it at the moment is to go directly to Praxis Press. The link to the book I've just put in the chat now. It's called https://red letters. That's the Press's website, and there's a special offer on that you can get it for £10 from the, I think it's just over £10 from the directly from the website. If you use the code MML, the instructions are all on the website. That's the best way to get it. So yeah, it's so that's how to get it. I'm reliably assured. In terms of, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. In terms of that, it's been a really interesting discussion, but what it made me think about at the end was the importance, and this is following on from what John and Mary have said, the importance of waging the battle for historical memory as well at the moment, as a dimension of our class consciousness. You know, this making our own history was an attempt to kind of to start that discussion about the tools with which we do this and how we look at our history. But the importance of doing that, I think, at the moment is really acute, particularly when there is such a massive organized effort. You know, it's difficult, and I talked earlier about the spontaneous difficulties of thinking historically, or the difficulties of thinking that historically that arise spontaneously from within capitalist societies. But there's an organized ruling class offensive around history at the moment, designed to separate us now and to reinforce a kind of historical amnesia and to fracture the working class movement from aspects of its own history, to break up understanding of, say, the history of the socialist countries. When John was absolutely right to talk about, you know, Lenin talks about describes it perfectly. Marxism is the summing up of the experience of struggle of the working class. Well, the history of the Soviet Union, the history of the labor movement, they are all, and of all of the socialist countries, they are all part of that summing up of, you know, experience that we need to study and apply the right tools to studying. So history is a hugely important field for ideological struggle at the moment, definitely, and the kind of organized attacks that we see through the attempts to rewrite schools' curriculums around this are very dangerous, and rewrite school curriculums, and also to simply make it impossible in some countries to even discuss these issues. So I think it's a critical field of engagement. We need more historical materialist historians. That's absolutely true. I think the answer to that is that that will come with a vibrant, with a growing class conscious labor movement, because that's where they came out of before. But we also just need to be taking history seriously within all of the organizations within which working people struggle now, and trying to bring it to all of our political education and political education, however it's conceived. If this book plays a role in that, that's a fantastic thing to be able to say. So thank you very much for coming out tonight, and thanks very much to John and Mary for hosting it and speaking so kindly about it.
Very kind people. Well, it only remains for me to thank everybody for coming, and obviously to thank Jonathan and John, and I'll thank myself as well. But thank you very, very much indeed, and buy the book and come on a virtual tour, join the library, and come to our classes and support us in every way we can. Buying this book actually does help us with, coming to the classes and paying for them and doing all sorts of other things, and joining will help to keep the library going. So I can only say thank you all very much, and hope to see you all again, either online on some of our courses or in person when this dreadful pandemic is over, which I hope is going to be very soon, but I'm not going to bank on it. So thanks a lot for coming, and thank you for those Marge and Rich, who've done the tech. And this has been recorded. Oh, I should have told you that, shouldn't I? Yes, it's been recorded, and you'll find it online if you want to hear Jonathan's wise words again. So thanks very much, and I bid you all good night and happy weekend. Bye.